Hello and good evening. I'm Laura Sparks, president of the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art, and I'm just delighted to welcome you here this evening. If you're new to Cooper, we are among the nation's very best for students pursuing degrees in art, architecture, and engineering. From its founding in 1859, the Cooper Union has worked to advance access to a high-quality education for all, regardless of race, gender, religion, socioeconomic status. And as you just saw, this great hall stage has stood as a New York City destination for influential and everyday voices to engage the most pressing issues of the day. Civil rights trailblazers have gathered in this room to rally, to debate, to organize, and protest, from Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass to W.E.B. Du Bois and the founders of the NAACP, to James Farmer and Congressman John Lewis. It was also from this stage on this very day in 1892 that a brave journalist named Wang Chin-fu addressed an audience of more than 1,200 people for the inaugural meeting of the Chinese Equal Rights League. In his speech, Fang made an impassioned case against the Geary Act, a law that extended the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 by requiring residents of the United States to carry identification cards at all times if they were Chinese. That early battle against anti-Asian discrimination made it all the way to the US Supreme Court and paved the way for broader advocacy to advance civil rights for Chinese immigrants in the ensuing decade. Now, 130 years later, this great hall has continued to provide a free public forum for Asian American communities and so many others who make New York what it is, one of the greatest cities in the world, and for proudly lifting up the fearless activism that makes change possible. As the daughter of an Asian immigrant myself, tonight's program holds a really special place in my heart, and I'm so excited and honored to be celebrating the important legacy of Asian American New Yorkers on this historic stage. Tonight is also the first in a series of programs here at Cooper called the Gardner Foundation Great Hall Forum. The series is connecting today's voices with those who have made their way to the Great Hall over the course of its history to engage in civic discourse and to lift up their communities, just as Wang Chin-fu did here all those years ago. Our thanks to the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation for their generous support of this series and for making our new Voices from the Great Hall digital archive a reality. The website for that archive is actually listed in your program, and if you go to that link, you'll find just a treasure trove of recordings, photos, and ephemera from Great Hall programs that span 160 years. I encourage you to take a look. And of course, our thanks go to our friends at the Strand and the Asian American Writers Workshop. We're just so grateful to be partnering with them to make tonight's event possible. We have an incredible evening of performance and conversation ahead of us, including welcoming back one of our very own Cooper graduates, New York City Council member Shekar Krishnan. We're excited to have him here along with the rest of tonight's special guests. So to get things started, I am delighted to introduce the Executive Director of the Asian American Writers Workshop, Joffreen Uddin. She's the first woman to lead the organization since its founding in 1991. With over a decade of experience in working in the public sector, she specializes in communication, education, and fundraising. She also regularly volunteers her time with a number of literary and social change organizations and currently serves as chair of the Adult Internship Committee for We Need Diverse Books and as a literary council member for the Brooklyn Book Festival. Please join me in welcoming Joffreen Uddin.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you for joining us to celebrate over 100 years of Asian American activism in New York City. My name is Joffreen Uddin, and I'm the Executive Director of the Asian American Writers Workshop. And it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the historic Great Hall at Cooper Union this evening, located on ancestral and unceded Munsee Lenape land. The Asian American Writers Workshop is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to uplifting and amplifying Asian diasporic storytelling. For the last 3 decades, the workshop has been at the forefront of Asian American literary culture. And at a time when our communities are especially vulnerable, we continue to offer a space in which we can imagine a more just future together. This fall, we're also celebrating a decade of The Margins, our award-winning digital magazine that has provided a radically inclusive space and creative home for Asian diasporic writers across the country. We have a limited number of copies of our hot off the presses Best of the Margins anthology, and I hope you'll have a chance to buy a copy and explore some of the really special writing we've had the privilege of publishing in the past year. We're thrilled to be working with our friends from the Strand Book Store and Cooper Union to present tonight's program. I want to share special thanks to Tito and Walker at the Strand and the entire Cooper Union team. I also want to give a special shout out to the workshop's very own Lily Philpott. Tonight's program and pretty much every program we do would not be possible without her. As we're gathered here tonight at Cooper Union, I want to recognize that this is the exact site, as President Sparks mentioned, of the formation of the Chinese Equal Rights League, which was founded exactly 130 years ago today. On September 22nd, 1892, a group of 1,000 US citizens and 200 Chinese immigrant merchants and laborers gathered here in the Great Hall to protest the Geary Act, which was at the time considered the most oppressive piece of anti-Chinese legislation. They ultimately formed the Chinese Equal Rights League. At its first meeting, the Chinese Equal Rights League passed a resolution, then published as a pamphlet, condemning both the act's immigration restrictions and its denial of citizenship to Chinese Americans. Wang Qinfu, a journalist, lecturer, and activist who became an outspoken critic of anti-Chinese sentiment and stereotypes in America, is credited with leading the founding of the organization right here in this very space. And so tonight, joined by writers, artists, organizers, and local politicians, we are coming together to honor that day, 130 years ago, and to discuss activism across the Asian diaspora in New York City. From labor organizing to guerrilla art collectives, we're here to celebrate the vibrant and vital coalition of immigrant activists who call New York City home. As we walk on the path paved by those who came before us, we hope tonight and every night to turn the just future of our imaginations into a powerful new reality. Our program tonight is incredible, and I'm so excited for you to be a part of it. We are going to begin with an Indian classical dance performance featuring dancers of Leela Academy, Neha, Sneha, Vandana, and Inaya, and we'll include a note on the role of movement in activism from the Academy's artistic director, Rachna Nivas. Following the dance performance, Wajahat Ali will moderate a conversation with author Gina Apostol, organizer Whitney Hu, and City Council member and Cooper grad Shekar Krishnan. Thank you all again for joining us this evening, and we hope you enjoy the evening ahead. Please join me right now in welcoming Rachna Nivas, the co-founder and artistic director of Leela Academy.
Hello, everyone. Namaskar. My name is Rachna Nivas, and I am artistic director and co-founder of Leela Academy and our dance collective. And I am so honored to be here today in this absolutely beautiful space for a topic that is very personal to me. Just like so many of us, I was born to immigrants from South Asia, from India, and my father came here in 1967, which was a direct result of the 1965 Immigration Act that was passed by President Lyndon Johnson. I'm sure many of us are very familiar, which was a really poignant time. It is actually, that act changed the course of Asian Americans in this country, of immigration in this country. And it was passed as a result of pressures that were being put on the US government at that time by the Black civil rights movement to end discrimination of all kinds. And the act opened up the borders to allow for countries outside of Western Europe to immigrate here. So I'm a product of that. And while I was growing up, my parents were scientists, as were many parents of my South Asian American friends. But what I didn't realize is that at the same time, there were many of the great masters, legendary masters of Indian classical art, that had also come to this country for opportunity. And while my parents were trying to build economic opportunity, those artists came here as a result of the white hippie movement and the anti-establishment of the 60s and the 70s. And they were looking to the East for answers. They were looking for a newer way of looking at human life. They were looking for perhaps a deeper path for finding actualization and finding something more. So after several decades, I'm a product of that time. And, while I went to UC Berkeley, and while I was part of the very socially charged environment of that time, it wasn't until I started studying dance, and I started studying in this wonderful art form, Kathak dance, that I discovered the power of art and the power of dance to change perspectives, to push our bodies, our minds, physically, emotionally, spiritually, through movement. It wasn't until that time that I understood that building my South Asian American heritage, or my identity, could be so much stronger by connecting with my lived experience from both lands, my experience of living in America, but also of connecting to my ancestors and the oral tradition that's been passed down from generation to generation through embodied knowledge. So today, you will see my students of Leela Academy from here in New York City. They will be performing an invocation. It begins as a meditation in motion, attuning to the higher self, acknowledging the earth upon which we dance, the nature surrounding us, and acknowledging the oral tradition through which the knowledge has been passed down. They will awaken the senses through imagery using their hands to depict the opening of the curtain of consciousness, blowing of the conch shell, ringing of a bell, spreading flowers on the stage. They will embody the three entities or personifications that represent the cycle of life: creation, Brahma; Vishnu, preservation and sustenance; and Shiva, destruction to make way for regeneration. The piece will culminate with pure dance and technique to push the body and mind past its perceived enclosure. So this is our invocation. Rangmanch.
Good evening, everyone. How's everyone doing? Thank you for that overwhelmingly enthusiastic response. Much appreciated. Give it up to Leela. They did 54 spins for you. We counted. 54. All right. My name is Wajahat Ali. I'll be moderating this awesome conversation. Give it up to the Ethnic Avengers, or if you're a DC fan, the Justice League. I'm going to give them an introduction real quick. To my left, Whitney Hu is a community organizer based in Sunset Park. She's passionate about issues pertaining to mutual aid, anti-gentrification and displacement, food sovereignty, and immigration justice. During the pandemic, Whitney single-handedly raised over $65,000 for New York City's, you could give that applause, for New York City's Chinatown businesses, and co-founded South Brooklyn Mutual Aid in Sunset Park, which distributed fresh food, facilitated a free community store, and is currently working to support asylum seekers. She's currently the Director of Civic Engagement and Research at Churches United for Fair Housing. And if you want to know a very good 3.5-star Yelp Chinese restaurant in New York, Whitney. All right. To her left, he is a graduate of Cooper Union. You might not have heard. Shekar Krishnan is the New York City Council member for District 25, Jackson Heights and Elmhurst, Queens, two of the most diverse immigrant communities in the world. He is also the first Indian American ever elected to city council in New York City history, and he's chair of the council's Committee on Parks and Recreation. See, it's real. It's real. It's not just a TV show. Where he negotiated the highest budget ever for New York City parks. You can give that a round of applause. That's pretty good. He has long been a champion for the 34th Avenue Open Street, 26 blocks of pedestrian space in Jackson Heights that is the gold standard for open streets in New York City. And finally, last but not least, to his left is Gina Apostol, who is, you could give that applause. I heard that. There you go. Super badass novelist. I had to truncate her bio because it runs like 3 pages deep. But fourth novel, Insurrecto, was named by Publisher Weeklies as one of the 10 best books of 2018. Her third book, Gun Dealer's Daughter, won the 2013 PEN Open Book Award. Her first 2 novels, Bibliolepsy and the Revolution, according to Raimundo Mata, both won the Juan Lea Prize for the novel, the Philippine National Book Award. She's a fellow at Civitella Ranieri in Italy and Emily Harvey Foundation. Her essays and stories have appeared in the New York Times, LA Review of Books, Foreign Policy, Gettysburg Review, Massachusetts Review. It's gross. It goes on for a long time. She lives in New York City and Western Massachusetts, grew up in the Philippines, and she teaches at Fieldston School in New York City. Here's your panel. All right. Now, we could do this like Creedence Clearwater. We could be nice and easy, or we could do it like Ike and Tina and nice and rough. I say nice and rough and keep it bold and blunt. What do you guys say?
Let's go.
Let's go. All right.
That sounds good.
First question. Whitney, no BS. You're a community organizer. We talked about Wang Xinfu, who was here 130 years ago, addressed the crowd right here at Cooper Hall. Back in the day, the real Americans, those who were mainstream, looked at the rest of us and said we were the invaders, the swarm, the rats, the criminals, and they told us to go back to where we came from. And our ancestors said, no, thank you. And voila, here we are today. And some of the stories remain where we're still seen as the invaders. And the way Wang specifically pushed back against the Chinese Exclusion Act and then the Geary Act was through a multicultural coalition right here in New York City, community organizing. There's an opening right now, I believe. What do you think is an opening for us to create that coalition specifically between Asian Americans and other POC communities, which unfortunately there's also tension and divisions that have existed as well?
I can do this in 2 sentences. No, I'm joking. I mean, that's a really heavy question, and I think it's also one that I think I'm constantly reflecting in my own organizing with other Asian community leaders and with friends and peers from like Black and Latino and other immigrant communities. And I think, to be completely honest, like I feel like we are at an odds of both needing to educate ourselves of our history. And I say that especially for the Asian American diaspora because I think even with my own conversations with family and friends, we don't know our history. Between I think we have had huge gaps in, with the Chinese Exclusion Act that also included excluding other Asians from the United States, all the way to representation, teachings, like it really filters in. But I really am urging curiosity, and not just from Asians, but from other communities, to really learn their history. The one thing I like to say is white supremacy is not creative. And so what we're seeing with like asylum seekers right now at the border, like I like to remind my Chinese family, like we're the OG illegals. Like we were crossing the border. We are still crossing the border. And I like to remind folks, when I'm talking about solidarity with Black Lives Matters, like a really hard conversation I had to have with my own family was about, I reminded them, they live in California. I'm like, the largest mass lynching that took place in California were Chinese. And they did not know that. They did not know the history of Vincent Chin. They did not know that in the 70s, like Chinatown in New York closed down to go protest police brutality after a man was brutally beaten by police for trying to stand up to a Chinese teenager being beaten. They don't know about names of current people like Yang Song, Christian Hall, who have been brutalized by police. So I think in this moment of reflection for the Asian diaspora, it's really looking at the solidarity and compassion we can offer to our Black and Latino counterparts, and then also asking for that compassion back. I think there are softer things that are happening, right? Like trying to push to teach Asian American history into textbooks. I think media has done a better job of representing those narratives too, but I think it's really going to be an onus on us to hear that history and to look at one another and to understand that our safety is never going to be with compliance, it's going to be in solidarity. And that's going to be tough when I know people are scared, they have feelings, we all have feelings, but I think that's going to be really what's going to bring it forward.
Well, bigots aren't nuanced. And after 9/11, the first hate crime was against Balbir Sodhi Singh, a Sikh gas station owner in Mesa, Arizona. And the white supremacist wanted to get revenge for the violent act that happened here, done by 19 foreign terrorists. So he killed a Sikh Indian immigrant gas station owner. And for those who don't know, COVID does not have a nationality or zip code or ethnicity, and yet Asian Americans all across America are being blamed, beaten, and killed. Bigots really aren't that creative. What happens sometimes is our people and our diverse narratives and histories are flattened and erased because we aren't telling our stories. Our stories are always told to us by others. And as such, it's very easy then to become the villain, the invader, the swarm, the rodent, the criminal. Gina, you have fought back and you have used your talents and superpowers to create narratives and stories that reveal the depth and complexity of our communities. Speaking as a storyteller, because Wong was also a writer, he also used the pen to fight back, to create awareness. And I want to get into juicy, controversial territory right now, because you decided to ruffle some feathers in New York, and you did an open letter. Let's get you in more trouble. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I'm really mad right now. The United Nations is going on. The Philippines, very unfortunately, and in terms of storytelling, there's something to be said about, fascists also tell stories, right. and those stories have been winning, and the stories of the fascists in the Philippines have unfortunately been winning. We have elected 2 children of dictators to lead the country. Marcos, the son of Marcos, and the daughter of Duterte, the last dictator that we had. And he happens to be in New York, and Asia Society invites this man, says, we are delighted to host you tomorrow.
Is it happening tomorrow?
Yeah, apparently. Asia Society keeps changing it because they don't want the protesters to go. But I learned about this, so I was just... Anyway, I wrote a letter. I asked all of these people. It now has like 300 people signed on to the letter, and it only got published like at 2 p.m. So that's good. But in terms of storytelling, I think it's really important to tell the story, to get the story out. I think that We have to understand that everyone is telling their story, and we have to figure out how to tell that story so that people move. So, to be honest, I think I have to study the stories of the fascists. How are the fascists in my country telling their stories? I have to not, for instance, hide from, or it's so depressing what's happened in the country, in the Philippines, that I have stopped reading the news. I think I have to keep reading the news. I have to keep knowing the stories that other people are telling. And I think that's important to see why are people responding to the story, to the lies? Because they are telling lies. They're absolute lies that are being told by the Philippine president about what martial law was like in the country. So, yeah, that's what I think.
So, I mean, with the power of stories, oftentimes people are like, oh, you writer, you nerd, you always promote storytelling, but there's something there, especially with fascists. Sweden's the right-wing party, I don't know if you guys have been paying attention, scored some wins, and excuse me, go ahead.
Italy is going to be
Italy
fascist
also, right?
Next week.
And yet one of the leaders, she is a fan of Tolkien and Lord of the Rings, and she sees herself, which is hilarious, right? I'm like, there's a multi-species fellowship and Sauron, and you see yourself as part of the fellowship, which is fascinating because no one ever sees themselves as the villain. Fascists see themselves as either the victims or the heroes. Even 130 years ago, we were the villains that were replacing them, and you fast forward 130 years, fascists aren't creative. It's a remake, and we're still the villains of today. And when it comes to villainy, right, oftentimes one of the great villains are politicians, right? And our communities oftentimes don't trust politicians because we haven't been represented. These people are part of the institutions, and they pass laws that oftentimes take our votes, but then, leave us crumbs. Or if we get to the seat at the table, we don't have a seat where we're being served. You are a person who was a graduate of Cooper Union. You've seen many of these. You've heard many of these, talks: solidarity, or organization, community building, progressive activists. But you decided to go into elected office. How do you make sure that you actually have a seat at the table as an Asian American representing these oftentimes marginalized communities, and you're not being used and tokenized?
It's a great question. And first, I just want to say thank you so much to the Asian American Writers Workshop at the Strand Book Store for hosting us today for today's incredible conversation. It is true, I am a graduate of Cooper. I've danced Bhangra on the stage many times before in college, and it's good to be back here too. Wajahat, I think and also to be here with these incredible panelists as well, both Gina and Whitney too. So much respect for you both, and it's a pleasure to be here and to be with you too, Wajahat. And I think your question is a very, very valid one, and one that I think about every single day in the work that I do. I didn't start my career into politics. I came into this before as a civil rights lawyer representing tenants for a long time, fighting housing discrimination, fighting gentrification, displacement, holding many of the same electeds accountable in whose seat I sit now. But I've also seen something we've talked about too. Let me just say up front, it is not enough. Yes, as the first Indian American in the City Council, I'm proud of that, and that's a testament to our communities, but that's not enough. We have to demand a lot more from our electeds. It's simply, if we don't want to be tokenized, if we don't want to be a tool used in a machine and its establishment, then we have to demand more than simply just representation. What's crucial is representation that ultimately takes its lead and follows the lead, especially of the working class communities that make up our communities of color. I think that is so crucial. And it matters because for so long, not having a voice in government has directly impacted how we are perceived, or really how we are invisibilized. We know, we've talked about this just now, the amount of racism and hate that we've faced over the years, going back centuries, 9/11, the way in which so many of our South Asian, especially our Muslim communities, were victims of NYPD surveillance, to COVID, both in the stereotypes and hate through COVID, but also the way in which we were invisible in the data and the lack of disaggregated data about the impact on our communities. And I think a part of that really stems from the lack of representation. And I think there are two experiences that really stay with me, both on the city level and the local level, that I think highlight why representation and our communities having a voice at the table is so important. The first one is a fight that I was involved with just even before taking office, and led by the taxi workers of our city. Right. For decades, the taxi workers have been victims of predatory lending schemes, yes, by banks, but especially I blame the city of New York for encouraging these predatory tactics, for overtly partnering with banks and taking advantage of so many cab drivers, many of whom are Asian American and South Asian. And I'm proud that my district in Jackson Heights and Elmhurst, I'm biased, but I do think we are the most diverse community in the world, and as we talked about backstage, have some of the best food in the world too. But we are a community, we have the largest taxi driver resident population in New York City. And so to fight alongside the taxi workers who for decades were being ignored by the city, but showed up en masse and camped out at City Hall every single day, marched in our streets, and we engaged in acts of civil disobedience together. And because of their leadership, we're able to achieve a historic driver bailout that had never been achieved before in the history of the taxi industry. And that just speaks to the power of that representation. And I really say to follow their leadership and their representation, I think is so critical.
I mean, connecting the dots, right? You talk about the lack of representation, the lack of our faces being the protagonists of the American story, the ignorance of our own history, the lack of knowledge and how it connects. 130 years ago, there was the Yellow Peril, right? Chinese Exclusion Act, lack of representation, lack of stories, very easy to demean them, villainize them. They're coming here, they're replacing us. It was literally the economic anxiety of the white workers in California that led to the demonization, and then politicians said, aha, I have a hook for the elections, let's go against them Asians. Fast forward, it's 2022. The Yellow Peril has been replaced by the Kung Flu. Where did we fail in the past 130 years? And this might be too harsh, but or maybe we didn't fail, but how America failed, that this myth is so persistent that it has been able to be rebooted so successfully by oftentimes right-wing actors. And I'll throw that to anyone.
I'm just going to go right at that because I will say it's
You're
not
angry, do
our
it.
failure. Yeah. I do think that the white people always make the wrong choices. There's just constant wrong moves, you know, to go to Kung Flu and to think that makes any sense, to go to bullshit Yellow Peril stuff. And I think we need to put the onus on the figures of power, the cultural power centers that keep moving, that actually degrade their own society, their own concepts of freedom. And I think that we need to be very clear that it is not on us to change that white power bullshit. You know, it's on them. I mean, just in terms of what was happening with Asia society, why is Asia society doing that shit where they're going to, where they know that there will be pushback against them? Because, again, it's a cultural institution that is going with whiteness, going with white supremacy power. And they know that they can use this figurehead, the Marcos person, to forward their own agenda, which is really about geopolitical issues with China. You know, so, and again, the demonizing of China as, you know, whatever China's authoritarian government versus what the Chinese people are also doing in their country to resist their government, just to keep the nuance there, but always put the blame where the blame should be put, which is on white supremacy, patriarchal capitalism.
Gina promised to be subtle tonight.
And I agree, because I feel like a lot of the language that is used, and I feel like, you know, I really do think the George Floyd protests really reinvigorated and kind of brought to light a lot of the microaggressions, the racism, like things that have just gone without actual checks and balances and being called out. Because when I think of, I'm always complicated. I'm like, China, yes, not always good. But the xenophobia that is really permeated from media to elected officials, even right now, right? When we're in moments of economic peril, it is often correlated with all of a sudden, who has an economy too? China. And I just don't understand how that continues to be the boogeyman. And America always looks for a boogeyman. America, and reading about history, it's always really interesting because I was reading about some of the Asian peril back during the Chinese Exclusion Act was around opium dens. And for the first time, I was listening to a podcast. Podcasts are great, really recommend podcasts. They were like, oh, wait a second, did you know that white people actually used opium more than Chinese people? And I didn't even know that was a statistic. And then when you think about the criminalization of black and brown neighborhoods today around drug use, that we are legalizing marijuana while black people are still incarcerated for, lower offenses, all of a sudden you start to realize and you start to, I think, reorient ourselves within the history. And I think that narrative cannot go away, because I think that's the only way that we can counter fascism and all the right-wing attacks, is to continue to perpetuate the truth, that enough of us know it, that we can't be blindsided by the lies.
Go for it.
I was going to say, I couldn't agree more, and I think I would just add, both as an elected and also as a lawyer before, that I
like how you had to throw that in there, as a lawyer before.
No, because
well done, Desi Kid, well done.
I know, right? But I say to talk about, it's the instances of hate and everyday othering, but it's also the way that this hate and racism is baked into our laws, our legal systems, and policies. And we have to recognize that and be very honest about that, because that's what legitimizes it. We talk about a criminal system, as Whitney said, that locks up and locks out of society brown and black people. We talk about hate and the way that it is normalized, the way misogyny is normalized. This is because American society has for decades built a legal system that fundamentally oppresses those who are not white and elevates in different ways white supremacy. And that's a huge part of the issue that we need to talk about too.
Oh, they've been doing for centuries,
For
by
centuries.
the way.
Speaking about certain narratives and certain whiteness and white supremacy, which I don't think we're a fan of here, is this a safe space to say that? Is this a safe space? Is it okay? All right. Yeah? All right. Let's talk about the mall minority myth. Some of us have chosen whiteness. By some of us, I mean some Asians. Okay, some of us and some of our parents unconsciously chased whiteness for security, for protection. They came here post-1965 and said, who's winning in America? The whites. Who's having a rough time? The blacks. I'm going to chase the whites. The mall minority myth has been perpetuated, created as a divide and conquer method against our communities. You can disagree with me and push back, if you will. Some people have bought into it. I believe it should be demolished. I believe it's always been regressive. It's been harmful. I always feel it's been divisive. And it's always been bullshit. It's not real. You might agree with me or disagree with me. If you agree with me, what should be the new narrative of Asian American communities in America, if not the model minority myth?
It also invisibilizes and hurts our communities too.
Yeah.
I think, especially in New York, and I think you can really attest to this, the lack of resources that go into Asian communities, pitted against the poverty and the actual services that are needed, is consistently, I think, hidden behind the model minority myth.
We work hard. We
work
pull
hard.
ourselves from the bootstraps. We don't whine and complain.
I mean, my family almost went into bankruptcy because my dad was too stubborn to go onto Obamacare, and it took me and my mom secretly organizing around him to get there too. So the pride is there. I think it's interesting too because a lot of my organizing, I'm seeing more second and third and fourth and fifth generation come on out, and I think that is going to be what really helps us go back to our families who I think have found a lot of protection within the model minority myth. I think with a lot of the attacks seen on the Asian community, there's been this awareness that maybe we weren't as safe as we thought we were. And those are conversations that I've had to have with family over and over again. And also, I think, affirmative action is one that is really fucking hard to have conversations with, because so much of this is about education and pride and seeing that this has been something where we've been able to stake out a moment into. And
it's also used as a wedge between our communities and other people of color.
And I've had a huge conversation with family in California where this is it's as contentious as it is in New York, but it's really contentious, and I have to remind people that the seats that they're actually fighting for are the ones that mediocre white students are in. And that is a conversation that is harder to have, but I think needs to be consistently pushed back, because what I also remind people is affirmative action benefited us deeply after Japanese internment camps. We didn't just come back into society.
That's right.
And I think sometimes that history gets lost because white supremacy and a lot of the white, funders who are behind these movements and are utilizing us in that fight to wedge forward know this, and they want to suppress it. And so I think that's where storytelling and truth-telling and having maybe even elected officials, I go back and forth on y'all, but I love you, being at that pulpit and utilizing that pulpit and making sure that we are shining a light on it are so key.
And I think, Wajahat, I couldn't agree with you more. That myth needs to be shattered. And I think we, as Asian American communities, need to acknowledge that when you play into that myth, when you perpetuate it, which far too many do, you are actually a tool of the oppressor. And you are furthering white supremacy in its different ways, because as you said, it was a tool of white supremacy to divide in the first place. And I think what it does is really two things which we, I think, have responsibility as Asian American communities to challenge within our own communities too, is that one, it denies the truth that at the end of the day, our futures, our salvation is fundamentally linked to the salvation future of our black siblings. And that what they have achieved, we stand on their shoulders, one. And two, we're also denying the own problems in our own communities. I mean, the level of Asian poverty, the working class communities that are invisibilized, we're damaging our own communities and the serious issues we face by playing into this myth, and it happens far too often.
Gina, I want to ask you this question. What's the cost of assimilation, and what does true integration look like for Asian American communities in this country?
The cost of assimilation and what is true integration.
To you, yeah.
For me, well, the cost of assimilation is really a lot of fuckery, and
You can tell Gina woke up and gave zero fucks tonight.
Where even the question that you had about how would you make yourself the protagonist, even that question is already kind of it's messing your head, because I'm going to be honest, I've always been the protagonist. Right. I've never, and I think that that necessary centering of who we are, that even including the fact that we've been tools, that centering all of the complexity of the Asian American world, the fact that we are also Korean, we're also Chinese, we're also Malaysian, we're also Burmese, that we're so many different groups of people, and we're allying ourselves with them. I think that we need to keep centering and recognizing that complexity, that multiplicity, even the fuckheadedness of who we are. When we accept assimilation, when we accept the model minority myth, because we're going to be moving into those spaces anyway. We are not perfect ideological creatures. But to constantly center our needs, our desires, our flaws, our strengths, and move always in that space. And always keep questioning when we're not. Always keep questioning when we're not centering our sense of being and sense of self. Constantly moving into that. And so the issue of assimilation has to do with constant recognizing of the mindset that puts you in that space, which is really the mindset of haters. I just say, people who are haters of other people in this white supremacy world. So so what I do whenever that's happening, I say, why are you such a hater? It's not about me, it's about you, these issues. The other thing about integration is that I think there's a falseness there in thinking that that any one person is going to be a unified being attached and connected to others. And to recognize that it's a myth, that is a myth, this concept of being, I think nations are myths. I think there's a lot of mythology that we have that actually separate ourselves from others. These notions of wholeness and even identity sometimes can be problematic because it does separate ourselves from others. And if we think of ourselves as more parts, fragmented, imperfect, wanting, desiring to be part of capital, knowing very well that it's a stupid idea. And all of these complexities should be embraced part of us. The concept of being integrated into the American society is, I'm very Freudian also. I do think that the Freudian self needs to be recognized, that we're just not, it's very hard for us to be a unified self. So to be American is a stupid idea. Because to be American is, again, a falseness, a fakery of self that we don't need to fuck around with.
What I've seen oftentimes is those who, a lot of my friends born and raised in this country, right, who, they're citizens, they're American just like anyone else. The cost of assimilation is they ask permission to simply exist. They're content being as sidekicks. They're content being sidekicks. They're content only having the appetizer. They apologize for apologizing. They apologize for being angry. They police themselves. They police their names. They police their history. And those who choose to center their stories as the co-protagonists, they have a confidence about them. And I think Toni Morrison said what you said many years ago is, even though they see me on the margins, I center myself and I have them come to me. Because I'm an American writer who just happens to be a black woman, and the black story is an American story. How much time do I have, Lily? Was that 5 minutes? That's right. How are you guys doing? You guys good? All right. Speaking about one of these situations where this lack of representation and the cost of assimilation and the harm it does psychologically to our communities is, instead of expanding and stretching the tent and realizing that all of our communities can partake in this expanding buffet, you realize, oh, there's a scarcity of resources. There can be only one. I have to be the first city councilman. I have to be the first writer. Only me. And I must destroy my competition. I call it the Highlander Theory, a classic 1986 movie. You should Google it, where literally there was like a race of immortals who went around beheading each other, and then they used to absorb each other's powers, and they said, there can be only one. And I feel like this is like a plague on our communities, right? This is what colonialism does. There can be only one token. You're the good Filipina. You're the good Indian. You're the good Chinese American. And we're like, we're the good ones. And we're going to knock out everyone else. I've seen it happen in my generation as well. How do we end this destructive, if you will, divide and conquer technique for the young generations and show them, literally show them the wins where if you expand the tent, not just for our communities, black and brown communities, we all win. Shekar.
I think that is the fight that we face in front of us. I mean, I think it's ridiculous, and you're right, it happens too often within our communities to play into this tokenization. It's ridiculous, and I think we have to first, realize that the way that we build power, right, and I think going back to what Gina was saying too, thinking about this whole issue, at the end of the day, I feel believing that our baked into our system of laws and is racism going back centuries, is that we've got to be ultimately working and fighting to build power together for poor people of color. That is ultimately the work that we're in the project that we have to be involved with. And if we believe that, we can't believe that there's any savior, that there's any person in government or on the inside that's going to save it for us. I actually think you have to believe that the real fight is outside, on the streets, with movements, and you're a part of that. And politics, isn't the movement, it doesn't lead it. Sure, it's a part of it, but that can come and go any day. That's where the real power is. And I think that's where we have to push everyone to align themselves.
Well, real quick, and with limited time I have, you mentioned there's something here and tying it all together. People outsource. And when people outsource and think there's a magical figure or the Avengers that are coming, that's how you get fascism. The strong man. He will save the day. And the Avengers aren't coming. As our parents learned, we got to do it ourselves. I believe, and you guys might disagree with me, that everyone has something. Everyone's got some superpower, right? And with the final question that I have, how will you and how should you, and I know I'm asking you a should question, how should Asian Americans with some power and privilege use that power in this moment? What should they be demanding? What should they be standing up for? Who should they be fighting? Whitney.
I am a Taurus, so I don't believe in organizing from scarcity. The world is abundant, and I think we really have to rewire the way we think. Mutual aid was the thing that I think kept me sane during the pandemic, but mutual aid is not new to our communities. Mutual aid especially is not new to Black, Indigenous, or immigrant communities, but is something that I actually really am pushing. Grace Lee Boggs once said that in order to have a revolution, we actually have a revolution of ourselves first. And I think that is something that is consistently lost in the fight, where we sort of want people to go into action, but we're not asking them to like reflect on how they're coming into spaces. And I think with mutual aid and the way that I really push is this idea of solidarity, not charity. We're not helping others. We're bringing ourselves into the fight with, and we're fighting alongside people. We're not going into communities with saviorism. You know, I organize with Chinese seniors, and let me tell you, they do not need me. They are stronger, faster. They can dance longer than me. But they are coming into these spaces and they are learning. And they are also learning language. Like, they're learning the language that we, I think, as second and third generation are maybe more intuitive about. And I don't want to say political correctness, but I think about being inclusive and accessible. And, you know, after 2 to 3 years of organizing with a Chinese group, they recently started using mutual aid in their language. They're really starting to realize that we can't be doing means testing, scarcity. We can't be critiquing and vilifying our own people when they need help, and to give that help back. So, like, if you're looking to get involved, there are amazing organizations that can kind of, whatever level that you're at. If you are a feminist, Asian American Feminist Collective, great space to kind of come and educate yourself. Asian American Writers Workshop does amazing work bringing in the voices of our diaspora. There's so many great authors to be following right now, like Gina, like Minjin Lee, like Alexander Chi. Like, there are folks out there writing our stories and controlling Twitter. Follow them. You know, there are politicians, like we have Shekar, this is like the most like Asian council we've ever had. And we're like the fastest growing demographic when it comes to voters, which is absurd that we're now seeing representation from like Shahana Hanif to like Julie Wan and like other progressives coming into the council. And I think that's important because elected officials from our diaspora have typically been conservative. And to see this many young people coming in is important. So. And there's a lot of mutual aid groups. And Red Canary Song, Send Chinatown Love, there's a lot of groups. Wing on One Co., which I know is a store, has a really great project. So there's a lot of people out there thinking, reflecting, and I think you should find them.
Mutual aid, reciprocity, get involved. I have 90 seconds left for both. Shekar.
You join the issues that are affecting all, and especially our Black and brown siblings. You fight to stop evictions in the city. You fight to end solitary confinement. You fight against transphobia. We have to see the work that we do as our Asian American communities, like I said before, as fundamentally tied to the larger work that our Black and brown siblings face, and that's what we have to do.
Multicultural coalition, work local, help the poor, the Black and the brown. the queen of zero fucks. Lead us out on no fuckery.
Yeah, well, I completely. I think we need to be with our with African Americans and with the Native Americans. I think having that solidarity, having that connection, and learning from Native America, learning from the indigenous peoples, learning about their resistance and their beautiful, amazing history of survival, and knowing our connection to that, knowing our connection to African American resistance, that will also, I think, really enrich us and help us be free.
130 years ago, right here in New York City, right here in this hall, Wang Xinfu tried to create a multicultural coalition to advance the rights and the dignity of Chinese Americans and their allies. Fast forward 130 years, on this august stage, we have a badass Filipina-American writer, a best-selling writer, award-winning writer, Gina Apostol. Give her a round of applause.
Could I just say, 6 years after, I think 6 years after that moment here, it was also another Asian American in 1898 who established the Supreme Court case on birthright citizenship. Right. You know, Wong Kim Ark.
And he's talking about step by step. It's all connected. Next to her, we have the first ever Indian American elected to city council in New York City history. We have an alum of Cooper. Have you guys heard about that before? Desi kids let their kids grow up to be Shekar. They do not let their kids grow up to be Dinesh D'Souza. Give it up for Shekar Krishnan. You'll take that. And finally, your very own community organizer who just knows everyone. So if you want to get involved, literally talk to her. And if you want the best recommendations for awesome Chinese restaurants in the city and in Texas and California, Whitney Hu. Thank you to Lily. Thank you to Joffreen. Thank you to Asian American Writers Workshop. Thank you to Cooper Unit. Thank you to all for coming. Thank you to Leela for doing 54 spins for us. Get involved, organize, don't give up, have hope, take care of each other. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for moderating.
Thank you.